Hi friends, welcome back. We are going to keep reading The Outcasts of 19 Schuyler Place by E.L. Coningsburg. Remember, I don't own the rights to this book at all, no copyright. It is just purely for educational purposes that we're reading it together. All right, so last time we read, Margaret had just found out that the towers are going to be torn down, and she's obviously not happy about that at all, and she's resolved herself to do whatever she can to make sure that the towers stay up. So we're going to pick back up with chapter 15. The minute I got back to the house, I dialed the number that Mrs. Vanderwaal had given me. I expected to get an answering machine, but I got a human voice instead. Unprepared, I asked, "Who is this?" A pleasant male voice answered, "This is Peter." Pause. "Now, who are you?" "I am Margaret Rose Kane," I began, and then I rattled on. "I am the daughter of Naomi Landau, who is the daughter of Margaret Rose Landau, who is the sister of Morris and Alex Rose. They were your neighbors when you lived at 21 Schuyler Place? I'm their grandniece, Margaret Rose, and we need to talk." "Can we start at the beginning, please?" Peter Vanderwaal had lightly dusted his native Epiphany accent with the vowels of the British royal family, but there was also something welcoming and kind in his voice. "This sounds like a matter of some urgency." "Very urgent," I said. "Because?" "It is urgent because the towers are coming down unless we can save them." I heard him gasp. I began reading him the newspaper article. He interrupted when I had gotten no further than, "The city has awarded the contract to demolish the structures to..." He asked me to repeat what I had just read. "Demolish the structures..." "Aha!" he said. "Their first mistake." "Which is..." "Structures," he said. "That's where we'll get them." "Where is that, Mr. Vanderwaal? The towers are not structures. They're important works of outsider art." "Does outsider art mean that it isn't indoors?" No, my dear. Outsider art means art that is outside the mainstream." I wondered, didn't his Ivy League college teach him you shouldn't define a word with the word being defined? Mr. Peter Vanderwaal continued, "Most people call it folk art. It means it was done by a person who has not been formally trained." I had heard the towers called an off-color joke and superfluous and a waste of time, but I had never heard them called works of art. "You mean that my uncles are artists?" "Yes, Margaret Rose, I do mean that. They fit the category. Outsider artists make up their own techniques and use materials that trained artists don't use. That's your uncles. Outsider art is less refined, less restrained than mainstream art. There's always something untamed about it. An outsider artist is like a gypsy violinist. Either you are a gypsy violinist or you aren't. You can't go to school to become one. And that's the towers." "And that means the towers are works of art?" "Precisely. Your uncles are artists and the towers are not structures that were built without permits or plans. They are true works of art. They are, in fact, masterpieces." Masterpieces, I thought. My uncles made masterpieces. There were 3 of them in the backyard of 19 Schuyler Place. 10 minutes ago, I didn't even know they were artists, and now Peter Vanderwaal had said they are masterpiece artists. "Mr. Vanderwaal," I asked, "are you sure that my uncles are artists?" "I'm sure." "And that the towers are masterpieces?" "They are. But Margaret, I suggest you recover from this shocking bit of news so that we can discuss the problem at hand. But first, I must hear the remaining portion of the article. Read on." When I was done, he asked, "Does your mother know about this impending doom?" "She does, but she can't help. She's off on an archaeological dig." "Really? How very interesting. I've always wanted to do that myself. Is it Egypt?" "Peru." "Oh, yes, of course. Egypt wouldn't do. There's that Jewish thing." Mr. Vanderwaal paused a minute and then asked, "Your uncles haven't put Stars of David or anything religious on top of the towers, have they?" "No, just the clock faces." Yes, Mr. Vanderwaal said. "Totally secular. None of the neighbors ever objected when we strung Christmas lights all over the towers. One year my dad wired up a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer atop one of the towers. Of course, Rudolph is not in any way religious, although one could, if he were hell-bent on objecting, make a case it had to do with Christmas and therefore was. You don't suppose the neighbors are anti-Semites, do you?" "No, they're lawyers." "That, my dear Margaret Rose, is the problem right there." "They say they're worried about safety." "Pish-posh," said Peter Vanderwaal. "Those towers are safe. I climbed each one of them to the tippy top every Christmas I lived there, and I can assure you I am no athlete. And I have a very protective mother, and no one ever worried about my safety. Those towers are safe, my dear. They were built one rung at a time. Each part was made to fit tight and right before the next one was added. They're what we call modular. The rungs are only as far apart as your uncles could reach, and neither is very tall. The towers could and did support the weight of both your uncles at the same time, and I suppose you've noticed, neither of your uncles is underweight. They do put real cream in their coffee, Mr. Vanderwaal." "Very civilized, but irrelevant to the matter at hand." He thought a minute. "But this isn't. Those towers have been through windstorms that blew down mighty oaks and ice storms that cracked cables as thick as my wrist, and nothing ever happened to the towers except some of the pendants came off. I can assure anyone who asks that if the forces of nature had not blown them down, nothing ever will. Those towers were built to last. It will take a blast of dynamite to take them down. Surely they're not going to risk dynamiting them. Or are they? One report says they'll be deconstructed from the top down. Eddie Fiscaro said he cannot chop them down like redwoods because there's no place for them to fall, and he can't implode them because they're too close to the other houses. Peter Vanderwaal thought a minute more. Let me tell you something, Margaret Rose. This travesty the Homeowners Association is trying to pull off is really about money. Those old glass houses are not homes to those yuppies. They're investments. Fixing them up is nothing more than a chance to get money from that trust fund and resell them at a profit. What the lawyers are saying is that their property values will go up if their idea of historical accuracy prevails. Make no mistake about it. The only thing more destructive than someone who thinks his idea is the only possible correct one is a group of people who all think they and only they have the right answers. And when that group is lawyers, watch out. He paused only long enough to catch his breath. We have to do something to stop this cultural Armageddon. He took another breath. If we can just stop the demolition until I can get something together to prove that the towers are not structures but works of art, I think we'll have a shot at saving them. Do you have a plan? I'm going to do the first two things grown-ups do when they're faced with a problem. What are they, Mr. Vanderwaal? 1, they form a committee, and 2, they give that committee a name. Okay, I said. What will they name the committee? Not they. Naming the committee is very important, so we will name the committee. I suggest we call our committee the Cultural Preservation Committee. Yes, that name is very good. It has 2 out of 3 positive words, cultural and preservation. Everyone in the world is in favor of culture and preservation, and everyone in the world has to live with committees. The Cultural Preservation Committee, I repeated. Yes, we'll abbreviate it CPC, which is also very good. We don't want an acronym. Acronyms are so over. So who will be on your committee? My uncles? No, Margaret Rose, forgive me, but your uncles must stay out of it completely. Completely. Your uncles must never show by the least scintilla that they care. They must be artfully indifferent. That won't be so hard. They seem to have given up. I think they're resigned to the towers coming down. But I know someone who will be happy to join the CPC. His name is Jacob Kaplan, and he's an artist, and he admires the towers a lot. Who is that? I welcome the opportunity to repeat the name. Jacob Kaplan. He's an artist, and he loves the towers, and he's going to paint a rose on the ceiling of my bedroom. He'll be happy to join the CPC. Good, Peter said. That'll be fine. But we need rainmakers, people who are known to make things happen, people with prestige, people from the world of art who can get results. I know some. I'll sign them up. I have some pictures of the towers that I took at various stages of their completion. Your mother has a picture of you and my mother and Loretta Bevilaqua on the towers. Won't that show how safe they are? Maybe, but that won't be the angle I'll be working. I shall get a group together to have the towers declared works of art. My group, of course, will also be known as consultants. Will you be forming a committee of consultants? Margaret Rose, my dear, no such thing as a committee of consultants exist. Consultants have been known to work with committees and even, on occasion, on a committee, but they never form committees for the simple reason that each believes his opinion carries so much weight you could not possibly need more than one. So, my dear Margaret Rose, I must gather their opinions one at a time. What angle will I be working? I'm glad you asked. Here's the first, second, and third thing you must do. 1, stop the demolition. 2, stop the demolition. 3, stop the demolition. How? Any way you can. When is it to start? Next week. So you see how important your job is. I saw Uncle Morris's car pulling into the alley. I'll think of something, Mr. Vanderwaal, I said. I've got to go now. Stay in touch, he said. You too, I replied, and hung up just seconds before Uncle Morris walked into the door. Chapter 16. After my uncles went upstairs to assemble the scaffold, I found the name Bevilaqua in the phone book. There was only one. I waited to call until after the sounds of my uncles arguing stopped and the clang of metal being joined to metal punctuated the sound of Mozart coming from my bedroom radio. I had not expected a lengthy conversation with Mrs. Bevilaqua. All I really wanted was to find out how to reach her daughter. But Mrs. Bevilaqua was lonely, curious, and proud of her daughter. So she asked a lot of questions about my mother, my father, and my uncles. She insisted on knowing why I wanted to get in touch with Loretta. And then when I told her, she said, "Oh yeah, my Loretta loved them towers, especially at Christmas. She helped decorate them. Your mother did too. All the neighborhood decorated them towers. Even that chubby Vanderwaal kid, Peter, a boy. Especially at Christmas. The year that Tower 1 was finished and the uncles had set the foundation for Tower 2, the Bevilaquas and the Vanderwaals asked if they could hang Christmas lights on Tower 1. Christmas was not the uncles' holiday to celebrate, but the spirit of the season was, so they said yes, and that started the holiday lights tradition. Everyone, including my mother, helped decorate the towers. When the second tower went up, long before it was at its full height, It too was decorated, and in the years that followed, decorated and lighting the towers became a neighborhood project. On a designated night, John Flanagan, who was a policeman and a neighbor, set up barricades and closed off Schuyler Place from Melville to Reinhardt Streets. And all the neighbors gathered in that one block and sang carols and drank mulled cider and ate donuts. And then Mr. Vanderwaal, who was an electrician, threw a switch and the tower lights went on. The tradition of Christmas lights continued even after the Bevilaquas left the neighborhood. The last year of the block party, the Epiphany Times ran a feature article on holiday decorations, and the towers made the front page of the style section. They were considered a sight worth seeing. Even people who by then normally avoided the area after dark drove by to see the tower lights. City buses slowed down to let the people get a good look. It was not until the year after I was born that the tradition of the Christmas block party died. The Vanderwaals and the Bevilaquas had long since moved away, and by that time their children, Loretta and Peter, had left Epiphany altogether. I asked Mrs. Bevilaqua if she would please give me Loretta's phone number. She said, "My Loretta, she's a big shot with Infinitel. You heard of Infinitel, eh?" I said that I had watched their commercials on TV. "They're the telephone company that has the motto, 'We go the distance for you,' aren't they?" Mrs. Bevilaqua said, "That's right, that's the one." Then she repeated the motto and told me Loretta was in charge of Infinitel's PCS, their Personal Communication Services Division, which was their new division for wireless phones. She has a big office in a corner of one of them tall buildings in New York. She has windows that see a river on one side and a bridge on the other, both going to somewheres in Brooklyn. Mrs. Bevilaqua told me that Loretta had married a man named Homer Smith. She doesn't use Smith in her business. For business, she stays a Bevilaqua. Anyway, she divorced that Smith, so she's still a Bevilaqua anyways. The company, they don't want her to use Smith. Whenever them big shots at Infinitel hear Bevilaqua, they know it means something. I asked if I could please have a number to reach Loretta. "You want home or business?" "Both, if I may." At work, she has a secretary, called an administrative assistant. He's not a woman, either. He's a man, her administrative assistant. He don't let nobody get online unless they mean business, big business. He asks, "Who am I going to say is calling, please?" Very polite, but he don't let nobody get on. But Loretta, she has 2 more lines in the office, one just for Infinitel people to talk to her. Intercom, it's called. I say, "Why not have 3 phones? They can afford it." That's their business anyways. And she got the administrative assistant to keep track. "Now I'll give you the number. Hold the phone." When Mrs. Bevilaqua returned to the line, she gave me 2 numbers, one for work and one for home. The home number I'm giving you is an unlisted number. It's very private, which means that nobody gets it unless I give it. Capisci? Capisci. I guess that Mrs. Bevilaqua was asking if I understood. I shook my head yes. Mrs. Bevilaqua asked again, "Capisci?" Yes, I understand. I understand completely." "What do you understand?" "That I'm not to bother her unless it is important. Really important." "Yes, capisci." After giving me the 2 numbers, area code first, Mrs. Bevilaqua advised me to call Loretta at home in the evening, or "You won't get past that administrative assistant." I thanked her, and she said, Loretta, she liked them towers anyway. Me too, especially at Christmas. I decided that since it was already evening, immediately would be the best time to call Loretta Bevilaqua. Loretta herself answered after only 3 rings. I introduced myself the same way I had introduced myself to Peter Vanderwaal, mentioning my mother and my uncles. Loretta asked, "How are they?" I told her my mother was in Peru and my uncles were depressed. She asked me why, so I brought her up to date on the sad recent history of the towers. She listened all the way through without interrupting, and then she said, "Legality would be the first thing the lawyers would work on. By declaring the towers illegal, they get the law on their side, and by having the neighborhood declared a landmark, they can claim that they have improved the value of your uncle's property. What would make their property values go up even more would be to restore the neighborhood to what it was before the towers were built. The neighborhood's not as old as Williamsburg, but Uncle Morris spits on Williamsburg. He says it may be accurate, but it's not true. He says it gives new meaning to the phrase real phony. But Old Town would be much more true. The buildings would not be reconstructed. They would be restored. Old Town would not be a walk-around museum like Williamsburg. It would be a living community like Rainbow Row in Charleston. By declaring the neighborhood a historical treasure, your uncle's property value goes up along with all the others. Peter Vanderwaal says the towers are an artistic treasure." "Peter Vanderwaal? You've talked to Peter?" "I have." "When?" "Today." "How is he?" "He's fine. He says the only values these lawyers and homeowners know are property values. Their property values. That they care about profit, not art. And Peter Vanderwaal says the towers are art. Outsider art. They're my uncle's personal expression, and my uncles have the right to express themselves. Freedom of expression is part of the law. And so is something called commonweal, the welfare of the community. Some years ago, an artist by the name of Christo, a Bulgarian, put up something he called running fence, which was 24.5 miles of a white curtain running up and down the California hills north of San Francisco into the ocean. It took him 42 months and 18 public hearings. My uncles never had hearings and permission from 59 ranchers. My uncles didn't know they needed permission to approve his plans. My uncles never had plans and a 450-page environmental impact report. My uncles never impacted the environment, just the neighborhood, and bore all the expense to put it up. My uncles never asked anyone for a penny. And 2 weeks after completing the fence, he took it down. Today, no sign of running fence remains on the face of the land. I thought about that for a long time until Loretta asked, "Margaret, are you still there?" "I'm still here," I answered. And this is what I have to say about 42 months. 42 months is a lot different from 45 years. And here is what I have to say about taking down running fence. Taking it down was part of it. Taking it down was an important part of its history. But that's not so for the towers. My uncles never meant for the towers to come down. They're not even all finished. My uncles were ready to start a 4th tower, but they never did. Speaking of fences, will they let your uncles keep the fence? Yes, none of the fence shows from the street, which goes to show they're not as interested in the commonweal as they are in appearances. Would they let your uncles keep the towers if they removed the sections that peek over the top of the buildings? I was shocked. I wouldn't even ask. I said, that would destroy the whole majesty of them. I'd never used the word majesty before. It came from somewhere deep, knowing, inside of me. Words can be part of your soul before they are part of your vocabulary. The thought that my mother's old friend was taking the other side was making me sick. She was making me sick. "Are you a lawyer?" I asked. "Yes, I am. I started at Infinitel in the legal department. Now I know why you're on their side." "Whose side are we talking about?" "Theirs, the lawyers and the homeowners who live all around my uncles." "I'm sorry that's what you think." "Well, I do." "Your thinking is wrong. I do love the towers, and I am going to save them. Now tell me what Peter said." "He said he'll form a committee, the Cultural Preservation Committee. He's going to get signatures from important art authority rainmakers on a petition to have the towers declared a landmark. We're going to call it the CPC because acronyms are so over." Loretta laughed. He didn't laugh at me. Neither am I. I'm laughing at Peter. It's so like him to form a committee. Rainmaker art authorities. That's an oxymoron. She laughed again. "And what are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep them from destroying the towers in the meantime." "Now that," Loretta said, "is sound advice. That's what I recommend too. Stop them from destroying the towers until I can save them." "How are you going to save them?" "I can't tell you yet. I have a lot of behind-the-scenes work to do first. We will have a 3-phase plan." "We?" I asked suspiciously. Was this another royal we? "Yes, we. You, Peter, and me. Phase 1, stop. Phase 2, stall. Phase 3, save. You are the most important player in Phase 1. You must stop the demolition." "How do I do that?" "Listen, Margaret, I'm willing to work on saving the towers, and I'm willing to lay out a plan, but I do not micromanage. Capisci?" "Yes, capisci." "No, capisci means you understand." "I do." "Do what?" "Understand. If you understand, you must say capisso. That means I understand." "I already told you I understand." Loretta Bevilaqua groaned audibly. "Ugh, then you understand that you must stop the demolition?" "Yes. After you've stopped them, Peter and his petition from the CPC will tie their hands for a while and slow up the legal work long enough for me to start Phase 3, saving the towers." She paused only briefly before adding, "In order for me to complete my part, or even to begin it, you must buy the towers." "I can't afford that." "Yes, you can. Have your uncle sell them to you for $1. "A piece?" "All right, $1 a piece." "They are worth a lot more than that." "Of course they are. Actually, they're priceless. That's why I want to save them. Pay whatever you want to for them. The important thing is that you become the owner. The law understands ownership. Until someone from the government serves you with a court order that the towers are to come down, you own them. As long as you own the towers, anyone who tries to occupy them without your permission is a trespasser. Possession is 9 points of the law." 9 points out of how many? Quickly dismissing the question as unworthy of further thought, she said, "It doesn't matter. Get a bill of sale and have it notarized." "Where do I do that?" "Wherever there's a notary public. I told you, I strategize, I plan, but I do not micromanage. I'll get started on my part first thing in the morning. Remember, if you want to save the towers, you must buy them and stop the demolition." "I definitely want to save them." "So do I." Driving up the stakes, I added, "I need them." "So do I," Loretta Bevilaqua replied, and quickly added, "So do we all." She hung up before I could even say goodbye. Loretta was used to getting in the last word. Whenever them big shots at Infinitel hear Bevilaqua, they know it means something. And now, so did I. So, I hope in the next chapter that we read tomorrow, we will find out Margaret's plan for stopping the demolition. See you guys later.